All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks where we're exploring the landscape of all things technology. I'm excited for this one. I get excited for a lot of these, but I'm excited again because one of my favorite guests of all time, Kristy Flynn McCann, is joining me from SkillCycle, and we are going to be revisiting SkillCycle because it's such an important conversation as we think about performance and all-in-one talent development, but also talking about the realities of kind of what we're dealing with from an economic standpoint and how we as leaders in the space can focus on building out an ecosystem and actually making the case on this. So this is going to be a dynamic conversation. So thanks so much, Kristy, for joining me again. Can you handle talking to me for another hour?
Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you for having me again, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Well, so let's jump right into it for folks who may have missed the last one, which I'd highly recommend you go back and check that one because we always have spirited conversations. I probably should put like a PG-13 rating whenever you and I talk because we just get rolling type of thing. So if your kids are listening right now, you might want to put in earbuds. You just never know what might spring up in this conversation. But if you missed the previous ones, for those who may not be as familiar with SkillCycle, they may have been familiar with Go Coach, which is now SkillCycle, and overview quick of what that journey's been like.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. So, for those of you who may not know me, former HR for over 20 years, and I created Go Coach after leaving corporate as a easy way to get people the upskilling that they needed with our Coach Marketplace and Learning Experience platform. And so we work with a lot of mid-markets and a lot of enterprises. And the reason I did this is that after 20 years in HR, I was just like, how can we make this easy and accessible for people to learn that's connected to their roles and their goals? And then how can we make this easy for HR, to essentially have one ecosystem for all talent and development? And so where Go Coach was the entry point with the Coach Marketplace and Learning Experience platform, the whole North Star has always been, why do I have all these disparate systems?
Yeah.
You know what I mean, with the talent and, and learning and development. Why can't we bring this into one ecosystem? So at the beginning of the year, we rebranded it and relaunched as SkillCycle, where now we own performance management, engagement, goals, OKRs, competencies, mentoring, and that all funnels into the Coach Marketplace and Learning Experience platform. So just to get to the brass tacks component, everybody has goals and everybody goes through performance management. And so when you get these goals, it's about how you accomplish these goals. And so the learning is actually connected to your role and your goals to ensure accomplishment and be able to measure that ROI. And then it's also connected to that feedback that you're getting through engagement and through performance management. So if you're being, told that you need to work on your communication skills, great. We automatically shoot into the Coach Marketplace and Learning Experience platform where it creates a personalized learning path that again connects your roles and your goals, and it's managed and measured. And so it's one whole ecosystem.
It's almost like you're managing the entire life cycle of skills, almost like a skill cycle. If you
SkillCycle. Yeah, no, it was because I was playing for like 20 years and was like, why am I going through this horrible process of giving everybody in the organization feedback and, tracking all this, and everybody, hates doing it. And the reason you hate doing it is because it falls flat. What's next?
Yeah.
You have all this feedback and where do I go? And so taking that feedback, it's an automatic performance development plan for all employees. Like, this is the feedback. This is how it's connected to that feedback and your role and your goals. So it's all intertwined. And so it really drives a what's in it for me factor because it's connected to what you're doing and not just about fluff and junk, right?
Just not another check the box exercise.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which, by the way, I love the sign in the background. I have to call that out for those people who are watching. And if you're just listening to it, you'll want to alt tab, or if you listen to the podcast later, you'll have to flip over to YouTube and see it because it's pretty sweet, by the way, because I think you still had a Go Coach pillow on your couch.
I do. Time. I still have it.
Now you have a SkillCycle pillow, a fancy light. I mean, this is moving on up.
This was the present that my team actually got me. So I recently moved again and they got me, my little SkillCycle light, and I love it and it lights up. And I have a great team. And so I can't thank them enough.
That's awesome. So one thing that actually, as you were talking about this, that made me, I was just curious if Because do you remember, it wasn't that long ago when there was the whole movement to like do away with the performance review. Do you remember that? I mean, it wasn't that long ago. Are organizations now shifting that back a little bit? Like, was it, because that's been my observation, is the pendulum swung where it was like, you know what, these things aren't adding value. Let's just do away with them. And then people kind of realized like, oh, I don't know that that was, maybe we threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing about it's look at the why behind what's adding value and what it's connected to, right? Because like, being in HR, like you have all these different things, and being an employee and a manager, you have all these different things. But what truly has helped you get from X, Y, and Z that made sense? Because like a lot of times, like people look at anything when it comes to talent and performance and learning as a check the box, but it's more about if we're going to do and say certain things, it has to make sense for what the outcome and return needs to be. And that's the way that I used to evaluate a lot of my systems. Like it was like one, if people weren't using it, didn't make sense, right? Or we did a terrible job of capturing why they should be using it.
Yep.
If people were using it but begrudgingly, again, is it the right why and making sense? If you're creating a policy or process and you don't understand how it connects to the overall company and organizational goals, it's the why and like doesn't make sense. And so I think like we need to continue to peel back the layers of the onion and understand the current state of organizations, where they want to be in the future, how to build that bridge, and then what the tools, processes, and policies that make sense to get there that actually invigorate an employee and they see it the what's in it for me rather than
Yeah.
being this is what it is and you're going to do it done.
This
And
is
I
the
think
thing that we have to do. And I think in many regards, this whole process and cycle has felt just more of a operational exercise of we have to do it. And if you've been in the space long enough, you do understand there are some operational components to it, like it's triggering compensation cycles and it's triggering, that kind of stuff. So there are some operational things in nature, but that's not where it should stop. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at is yes. And if that's all you're looking to do, then you're actually missing the root of the core purpose, which is, yes, that's an afterthought of that should come out of it. But really, the whole point of goals and performance management and doing all that should be to optimize people's performance and develop them in a meaningful way, not simply to check a box in a system so you know what percentage to give them, at
right.
the end of the year.
But that optimization leads to monetization. That's what
Yeah.
where everybody. I don't know why this falls down. If only half of your organization has the skills to be able to do your job, you're only going to be able to get half of that return. It's a mathematical equation. So like it's so if your goal is to have 10 million, which is say in revenue for the year, but only 50% of your sales and your customer success team is thriving, are you going to consistently rehire, which is going to put you back, 3 to 4 months and cost you money? Or are you going to give people the skilling, at a fraction of cost that could probably help another 25 to 30%? You're never going to
Yeah.
get to 100% capacity. But if you can get, to that 80%, like, the 80-20 rule and be able to maximize that, then not only can you hit that goal, but actually exceed it and find that you can actually do more with less because people have skills to be able to do their job and you're constantly improving it. And it's not point in time, but it's evergreen. And so goals are evergreen, feedback is evergreen, but we continue to push
It
them as
should be.
point in time, right?
Yeah.
And it needs to constantly evolve. So that's what I don't get. Like if
So do
you
you think it's been well, and I mean, we may be getting a little esoteric on this, but like, do you think this is one of those, have organizations just kind of accepted that this is how it is type of a thing? And because I find that sometimes I look at these conversations, I go, we can do better than this, but there in some ways is almost this, yeah, but I mean, this is kind of how it's always been. Where does
I,
that come from?
I think it's the reactiveness and the false narrative, right? So like
Okay.
even if you look back, like, the world before COVID, like the economy and everybody was thriving, or at least they said they were, right? Numbers talk, like,
On paper, it looked good.
right? Wall Street's happy, but nobody was happy, right?
No,
Because if you
no, the
really look
numbers
at,
were clear. If you actually look beneath the surface,
yeah,
just because the numbers were high, people were miserable.
well, not only people were miserable, but not only that, like everybody before COVID, the talk of the town was how everybody hates millennials because millennials want skilling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They want feedback from their manager. They want to be able to move up the career ladder. And like, you know, everybody's calling millennials high maintenance. Millennials are not high maintenance.
No, I know.
That
I
they
know. It
are
was like they're so spoiled. They want
and
to be
you know,
told
what
whether they're
we
doing a
were
good job or
trying to
not.
do for years. And they were just the ones to be able to say it.
Okay.
Oh my
Yeah. I like that you brought that up because sometimes I made a post about it a couple weeks ago. Because now you're starting to hear some of this with Gen Z stuff as Gen Z's moving into the marketplace as well. That, you know, some of these things that they're asking for, they get written off as they're spoiled. It's like, no,
God.
they're not. They're just human beings who
Right,
crave to know, how am I doing? What can I grow in? How can I get better at what I'm doing at that? And it's can be written off as, well, why do you care so much about that
right,
versus, oh, that's great. And so does everyone else. I think there's often, like you said, an assumption that everyone else doesn't care.
right, right. And it's not that way. It's just this is just natural, right? And everybody wants to have these opportunities because that's why we go to work for two reasons: for our family and for compensation, and for us to be able to build and grow within ourselves and be able to add value, right? The question I always had, you know, do you work to live or do you live to work? And right now, a lot of generations, including the millennials and you know those even older, we want to have value that we're just not working to live, that we're living to work, and that it's adding value, you know, not just for ourselves but for other individuals. Because like that's what kind of makes things cool. I mean, it's the whole reason I went into HR. It just wasn't about me. It was about other people. That I found that to be extremely valuable. It's why I worked at Pearson Education. It's about other people and the value that we can drive, you know, through education. And so people see this as charitable give back. It is not. It's about a self-evaluation of who we are, our own efficacy, and you know what we want to aspire to be, and you know all the good things that go with it for us to be able to feel good and look in the mirror rather than just doing things to do things. And I think that people just do things to do things because they think it's easier, but it's not. It costs them a lot of money. When
Yeah.
people leave, it costs you a lot of money. When people are happy, it costs you a lot of money. I don't know why people don't get that. Like it's
No,
very
it's,
obvious.
yeah, and your point on that is very much true in the sense that you do see this a lot where, I mean, and I've seen this just in learning and development as a whole, but you see this even broader in organizations, is the idea that, like you said, well, it's just easier if people just showed up and just did what we need and then went home and didn't have this desire for meaning and purpose in what they did. And to your point, on paper, that sounds really good, but you're dealing with people. You're not dealing with robots.
Right.
And like you said, when that purpose, when that stuff isn't there, people's performance is actually down. And it's not just this altruistic thing like, well, you invest in people because it's good for them. Like, well,
Right. Good
yes,
for you.
and it's affecting your bottom line.
Right. Good for you. I mean, it goes back to so like the one organization that I was working with, like the CFO had 40% of employee attrition baked into the number. And I looked at that, I'm like, whoa, I can make some money, right? As HR, I know how to make this company money because, like, that's ridiculous. 40% turnover baked into your numbers. So you're basically saying you're going to lose money and lose
Right.
people, but you have it baked in. And so that's what your forecast. And the way that I'm looking at it is that's an atrocious amount of people and money. And what if I were just to bring that down half? How much money not only can I save you, but how much more money you know what I mean, you could add like, you know, I mean, to your overall bottom line. And so like it's getting into the intricacies of that. And like as soon as like I you know, the many years I walked in organizations, like that was always the one number that I was always looking at. What type of turn do they have baked in for employees, like you know what I mean, into this forecast, and where can I improve and actually make money for this organization as HR? And that's what I always leaned on, right? I didn't go with like the fluff like, oh, we need to do this for our employees to make them happy. I'm like, no, I know how to make you money. And like, us losing 40% of an organization is not cost effective. And I'm going to bring it down to 20 and make you a lot of money being able to do that. And this is what we're going to spend, which will be a fraction of the cost to what you're going to lose, like, you know what I mean, with all this, turnover. And
Yeah.
I just think that do think that organizations, HR leaders, managers need to be able to connect that is that you bake in churn and you're accepting that life, you're losing money in dollars, and it's not doing good for anyone.
Well, and that's what I was going back to before is I don't think we always realize how much of that just gets baked into the corporate strategy of,
Right.
well, we're just shooting for this target. And it's like, but why does that have to be the target? Well, that's just what it's always been. And it's like, yeah, but what if we could close that gap? Because not only do you have the spend that you're talking about on attrition, that, the cost of bringing new people in, but also the opportunity cost of, as those people exit, all the things that could have happened that can't, because as much as you'd like to think, oh, when somebody leaves, there's somebody that just backfills their spot. That's never the way it works in an organization. The time it takes to actually bring someone in and acclimate them and all of that. I mean, it's a significant amount of money that companies are losing when
Right.
they have this wrong.
But they don't see it, they're losing it because like it's a forecast and it's baked in, and what they see is if they don't hit the goal, right? Um,
Yeah.
you need to be looking backward in order to look frontward as to what the real goals can be and what you could potentially obtain, and it's right there. And I hate to say it, it's not a lot of work. If you
No.
actually instill, like, let's just say you spent like 100K on bringing learning and development, to the organization, and you were able to add, 1 million, what I mean, to your overall revenue, like that's a drop in the bucket. That's a rounding error. You know what's not a
Yep.
rounding error? It's when you have 50% of your or 40% of your organization leaving. and then you got to retrain, restart over, get them acclimated, and then cross your fingers. Am I going to hit the goal? Doesn't work like that.
So what have you seen? Because I agree with you. It's in what we're talking about right now has always been, I don't know. It's one of those you have to see beyond just what's right in front of you a little bit,
Right.
because it is one of those like, well, this is just what I've become acclimated to. And it's not money I'm necessarily feeling the same as I do when I know, well, if I have to write a check for this, I feel that. Versus if we just lose people and rehire them, I don't, until you start clearing the books at the end of the year. And then you look at your ops costs and you go, we spent how much on all these other things.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you've seen help gets that to clock for people, because I will say sometimes you can feel like you're shouting into the wind
Right. Well,
on this one.
I think that, when you look at it from the perspective of all the people involved, like, so let's start with HR. We always talk about engagement, retainment, performance, and all that. Add dollars to it, right? Everything that you do within the goals and the roles within your organization should have monetary dollars as to how the organization can, not only save money, but, add value. So it's always bringing it down to the language of the CEO and the CFO. When you go in there and you can tell them that you're going to make this organization money, it's a win-win, right? So that's number one as far as understanding what that means for overall employees and everything.
Okay. So let me ask you this, because I know your personality, and I think that's part of the reason we get along so well. Is I've this is one of the things where, so I'll give you some natural pushback that I've heard from folks, and I'm curious your take on it, and maybe we'll jive on this one a little bit, because I think sometimes I do see this concern that people in the people space have associating numbers to what they do, because there's almost this fear of like, well, but if I say that, then what happens if it's not, if my calculation, if my projection isn't 100% accurate, type of a thing. What's been your experience in that? Because mine has been, I'll make projections and set expectations around the fact it's projection. It's a projection and an estimation on based on what I know, type of a thing, and what I think. And I've had it not turn out the way I thought. And as long as I've owned that, I've never been, dragged behind the shed and taken out like old Yeller type of a thing.
Right.
I mean, yeah, you have bad experiences where things happen, but my experience has not been taking that accountability and putting myself out there has had negative consequences. But I'm curious if what your experience has been on that one.
Well, I think the biggest now is that I'm a CEO, right? So when you're in the lens of HR, you're in the lens of the people strategy. And like, yes, you see all the other inputs and capacities within an organization of what sales needs to drive, as far as what customer engagement needs to drive, as far as what the product roadmap needs to drive, and what have you. And often at times in HR, like our goals, for lack of a better word, are a little bit more nebulous and unclear than the rest of the organization. And
Yes.
and I think that that's issue number one, that we need to look at ourselves as how we're, not just driving people, but driving, overall revenue. You know what I mean? How we're driving money, and have a goal attached. And like, you don't need to start too high. Like, when I saw 40%, like that to me translate that they had 40% turnover baked in. That to me translated how low the bar was. I'm
Yeah.
like that, the bar is really low. Like, you know what I mean? So even just being able to make, subtle impacts, like, you know what I mean, whether it's 2% or 5%, go a long way for clout and credibility that you continue to build, just like, somebody, who is a salesperson where, they may start out slow, but they have a win here and win there, and then they're building that clout and credibility, and the next thing you know, like, you're the top tier salesperson. So I think it's having that mindset. And like my mindset really didn't start to shift to that until I had my own organization. And it's one of the reasons why CHROs, I think, can be the best CEOs. I'm not saying by any means I'm the best CEO, but CHROs know the dynamics and ins and outs of a business and how the business works. And it's really about attaching those dollars now, like, you know what I mean, and being able to do it with a sense of sensibility of not just being a CHRO, but acting as a CEO. What would a CEO do? Because CHROs are supposed to be the trusted advisors of the CEO. You cannot be a trusted advisor to the CEO if you don't understand what's going through a CEO's head. And what's going through a CEO's head is always money. And so it's being able to make that translation. I think the other thing is gaining champions and allies too. Like I didn't do any of this alone. I had to get buy-in. If I was going to make sure that I brought down the attrition and save the company money and yield the company more money, I had to have champions. And those champions were sitting within sales, within customer success, within technology. And so it's basically like every organization, like it's not just a KPI. A lot of people are shared in that KPI. So bringing in other stakeholders to your KPI so it is shared will help you drive that overall momentum. So like at the end of the day, like let's just say you're not getting to where you need to be. You know what I mean? You have others that are there to help, triage that and what you need to rectify within your own project management. And the last thing I'll say is that if you're going to be a CHRO, your whole job is risk. And the reason your whole job is risk is because your entire product is people.
Yep.
Right. And we can all get technology to work, you know what I mean, as quickly as possible. We can all build product roadmaps and all that. But the biggest unknown is always going to be people, the way they think, they act. And so your job is risk. And so don't tell me that you're averse to it because you've signed up, for the people component. And so how do you change and evolve and work with the organization, with the people for a greater return that they see the what's in it for me factor? You're able to drive that with your champions, and it's, connecting to the ROI of an organization. I think once I stopped acting reactive and started acting pragmatic,
thinking ahead,
and assigning myself true goals that were not nebulous, it worked out.
Okay. Well, you hit on a couple really important things. I think that even ties to the whole technology conversation. So I'm going to hit on a couple of them as we go back through this. But even, the building credibility piece through landing and expanding and doing different things like that is a really impactful way to approach this type of a thing. I think sometimes, because even when it makes sense to us, what we're trying to accomplish, I think sometimes we can make the mistake of coming in and going, well, because this makes perfect sense to me, then everybody's going to get it and we're just going to be able to charge forward. Right. Versus, to your point, building those relationships and building that credibility through small wins and proving that stuff out. I think sometimes we go in for try to eat the whole elephant instead of saying, well, let's not write checks we can't cash before we've got clout in the organization and the relationships that have people going, hey, we should actually listen to this person. Right. That, what they're saying actually makes sense.
Well, I mean, if people aren't staying, it impacts the entire organization. It impacts your CTO, impact your head of sales, and it impacts the CEO, right? And so what are the paths and the plans, and they could be small, as a starting point to be able to get there. So the one organization that I work for, we couldn't retain anyone. It was ridiculous. But when I looked at all the cycles of the employees and what was going on within the organization, it started with recruiting. And no one within that organization, knew how to ask an interview question. No one, that actually tied to the role and the goals of the organization. So once we started to add training and development at the beginning part of the employee cycle, which is just, hiring and onboarding, it started to
Bringing the right
cascade.
people in.
Right.
Yeah.
It started to cascade, and it's
Yeah,
just
you're
like,
going
oh,
up. You're going upstream,
you're
trying to
going
fix things
upstream.
upstream instead of downstream.
Like we didn't churn 50% of the new hire class. No, we were actually, we only turned 30%. Okay, well, the next goal maybe should be 25%. And so that little improvement was able to show significant. It took 1 quarter to do, and was able to show significance over the rest of the year, because they weren't losing people now, because we were hiring better people, because we were asking better questions, and people were trained on what they needed to do, and that started to cascade into how they manage people. And so we were starting to see that ROI through another cycle right now, with past onboarding, but actually, like, norming and performing. So it's that was just a little thing, teaching everybody how to interview, and we made it fun. We attach it to their goals, we attach it to their roles, but it was also like, we would calibrate as to what was working and what was not working, and I was getting their feedback. It wasn't the Kristy edict of HR. It was the organizational, like, fine tuning, change management, evolution of maturity, and then seeing a significance, as far as the revenue was concerned.
Okay. So on that one, kind of piggybacking on that, as you look at that, because even that example, I mean, I guess that example specifically is within the HR umbrella, but you're still having to work with your counterparts on that, because again, you're hiring for their roles type of a thing. How have you, and this is more of a question that we can kind of unpack a little bit, but drawing those boundary lines of roles and responsibilities between what is our role as kind of the people strategy group versus our ops counterparts, or whatever group counterparts, where have you found success in defining where that boundary line is? Because I do think that inadvertently, sometimes we can almost isolate. And I mean, I've learned this through the School of Hard Knocks, where you can almost step on each other's toes, and that can almost isolate you from your stakeholders and the people that you're working with, because it's like, well, we're not competing against each other for who's the expert on this or who's the expert on that, and aligning on what that looks like.
Well, HR is a swinging door complaint, right? Everybody comes to us to complain. So in that organization at that time, do you know what the number one complaint was? I'm interviewing so much, I do not have time to do my job. Great. How would you like to interview us? How is that possible, Kristy? Am I going to train you? Well, that's going to take time. I'm like, short term, yes. Long term, no. Right. So it's like when we look at the swinging door complaints that are coming in, it's attaching, those themes, like, I mean, and attaching it to where their pain points are, and essentially how to take that pain away. And there will always be a partnership there, whether you have a kumbaya partnership or not. But if you can take someone's pain away, even just a little bit, you've gone a long way, because it's something that they don't have to worry about. And so, like, when it came to the next quarter, and they weren't spending 30 hours interviewing, and they're only spending 15 hours interviewing, because we didn't have to replace 50% of the hiring class, right? They had time back, and that was ample opportunity to help mature their overall managerial skills. So next cycle.
Yeah. Now, leading up to that, and I'm just drilling into this one because I'm actually really curious how you approach this one. Leaning into some of that, getting people to take that risk on you, because essentially that's what we're asking to do. Is like, trust me on this. Like, you say this is a pain point, I'm telling you what we can do to solve it. You're going to need to trust me a little bit. Is that something that you had already built and established some of that credibility in the organization, or was this a small enough ask that you were able to go, like, what's the worst? We promise we're not going to penalize you with Clockwork Orange training type of thing. Or how did you navigate that?
I mean, it depends on the organization. With that organization, they had a laundry list of complaints, right? So I just prioritized the laundry list of complaints and as to what it was. Not everybody was bought in, but those that weren't bought in suffered the most, because those were the ones that were having the most turnover. And so you kind of make it like the proof is in the pudding. And it's just like,
it's almost shaming it, as you go through the process.
It's like, even if you don't like me, and I like, it's like, we live in HR. Nobody ever called me Kristy. They're like, HR. I'm like, my name is Kristy. Like, you know what I mean? So like, and that, it was just little things like that too, that I would do with individuals who had this certain image of HR. Like they come in like, tell HR. It's like, no, my name is Kristy. Let's start there. Do I call you sales? Do I call you marketing? Right? It's not that serious. But the only job function that's actually like we're called our job function. But it
Yeah.
was little things like that for them to recognize, like, you know what I mean, and letting people know how you feel, and so they see how ridiculous it is. And it's like, are you going to go talk to marketing? Oh, you mean Max? Like, yeah, like no marketing, like and so seeing how they're doing things, but it also shows that training of what they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And
Yeah.
if you can give them a path for them to learn something, and those little tidbits along the way really start to translate into actual strategy and execution that they can show ROI with, they're going to be there. I mean, I didn't make friends with everybody. And, for the ones that weren't, for the ones that didn't have a growth mindset, 9 out of 10 times I got them on the chopping block because they weren't helping the organization either. Right. If
Yeah.
you say that you don't want to interview 30 hours a week and I can give you a path that you only interview 15 hours a week and you still say no, well, then that's
Right.
not my problem. That's your problem. And it's going to hurt you within your numbers. And so when their numbers were down, don't think I didn't take opportunities. Well, X, Y, and Z wouldn't do it, but X, Y, and Z's teams are doing great and they're not. And so then they have other pressures like naming to drive that accountability. Because I showed the proof and I only need to
Yeah.
show the proof once or twice for it to translate.
Yep.
And then it starts to translate.
Well, and what's interesting about what you're bringing up with this, and I think this is really, in some ways, I mean, we're on the topic of skills, but I think in many ways this is a skill that if you're in the people strategy space, you have to build, because going back to something you commented earlier, when you're responsible on the people strategy, like that is the X factor in terms of unpredictability and ambiguity when you're dealing with people, because you're like, well, 1+1, sometimes it equals 2, sometimes it equals 5, sometimes it's 93. And I really am not always sure what's in there. But as you were talking about that, I think that skill that we're highlighting is, and I don't know that this is officially a skill, but that skill of playing the long game and thinking about all these other factors. Because to the example you just gave, yeah, you might have that person that says, yeah, I don't want to participate in your stupid idea, even though you're going, I literally just told you how we could solve your problem and you're refusing to do it. And it'd be easy to throw in the towel and go, well, see, it's not working. But it's like, well, no, it's going to take time to get through that. It's not going to be an overnight transformation. I think sometimes we're so busy chasing the carrot, we don't take the time to go, wait, we need to look at the whole map.
Yeah. No, I mean, my head of sales at the one organization wanted to strangle me. There's no doubt about that. Like, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Because he knew that the quarter that we were going to be spending in true training and development was going to potentially take away from the hiring that needed to happen because, like, we had committed that we weren't going to do 40% attrition. We committed that, like, it was going to be 15%. So there was that component. But it was also like, do you want to make end a goal? Because the way that we're going right now, we continue in this.
We're not going to make it.
We're not going to make it. And like his recant to me was like, your recruiters suck, because that's always the recant. Your recruiters aren't hiring the right people. And it's like, look at none of the people that we're hiring report to my recruiters. So, your people are ultimately making a decision. And like, I mean, like I had scaffolding, I mean, for calibration sessions and getting feedback and, really working with them on job descriptions rather just being an order taker. So like I had like proactive improvements along the way. But I like when it came down to it, like, even though he's still the head of sales wanted to strangle me, I had made, returns and, you mean with the head of product and the head of technology. And so, and then, ultimately the other business partners that were able to yield that. And so I was able to, for lack of a better word, push him off, be able to do what I needed to do, had my champions backing me because I had showed results from them, get what needs to be done, and then be able to show that result. Right. And then of course he took credit for it, which honestly I could care less at this point in time because like because my life changed. My recruiters were no longer order takers, right? Like we were bringing people in to build development and skills rather just recycling and replacing. I mean, that's essentially where Rebecca came from. Rebecca was one of my recruiters and she came into my office day one. She goes, are we going to continue to, replace and rehire all these positions? Or are we going to do something different? I'm like, we're going to do something different. She's like, how? Like, it's going to take time. I'm like, tell me the department that's hurting the most. And she's like, sales. I'm like, tell me the department that's hurting, seconds that. She goes, CS. I'm like, we're going to focus on CS. And she's like, why not sales? I'm like, because I need to prove my point before I get with sales to make those changes.
Yep. Okay. So on that one too, because I think one of the things you're hitting at also is the tenacity of being able to go, head to head in some ways with these counterparts versus I do think there is more of that mindset shift to going, no, you have the credibility to speak up and speak into these conversations. You're not just on the sidelines waiting for them to, like you said, be an order taker and tell you what you need to do, but more go, no, this is how we have to approach it. And you're going to take, I don't know your experience, but I've taken a few on the nose over the years in doing it. And you just have to know that's the game you're playing. You're going to get beat up a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I got fired. I mean, but that's how I started SkillCycle. So fine by me. No, I mean, I went into a toxic situation, but I saw opportunity, right? Because the bar was so low. And the CEO at the time, mind you, a female CEO, basically was giving me the ability and the agility to make the changes within the organization for it not to be, a toxic bro fest and for it to actually be a fully functioning organization. And she backed me to a certain point. But then, ultimately she failed me. And, where I went in was where I just saw blatant, harassment, discrimination, disrespect. Of course, it was about careers, right? And we all know HR people do not like any of these events anyways, especially boat cruises. And a lot of terrible things happen on this boat cruise where, women were tugging wine. They were singing this Macho Man song. Like they were stealing buoys. I'm like, that's a federal crime. Like, you know what I mean? And, and I went to the GM when we got off that boat cruise. I'm like, you're done. I was just like, this is never going to happen again because he was essentially initiating it. And by not saying anything, like, he was culpable and complicit to it. And I remember, he went and whined to the CEO, obviously, before I got there. And, she called me up and she's like, well, this isn't going to work. I'm like, well, you're going to pay for it. And she's just like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm doing my job. Right. And not only that, I know where all the dead bodies are. And I'm like, and I don't need to get a legal team or lawyers involved right now. I was just like, you're going to pay me and you're going to pay me well. And, she essentially did. I mean, because her hand was forced and she chose him over me. And that sucked because I was doing a lot of great things. I had moved that organization. But 3 months later, yours truly, Matt GM, is in the paper and fired and whatnot. And 3 months later, I started, what was formerly Go Coach that is now SkillCycle. And so every failure is an opportunity. And I think that HR needs to see that. You are not stuck in HR. There are so many things that you can do. You've seen how organizations work. You see, what the best and the worst of things. You have learned more than you know. And so when I entered as a first year CEO, was I scared out of my mind? Did I lead on coaches? Did I lead on advisors? Absolutely. But I knew more from being in HR, that helped me, to really start to laminate, build a company from the ground up. And so I saw that as a huge opportunity. And, I was upset, but, I had a boatload of money. Do I go to an island and, get some Mai Tais and, some bonbons? Or do I start something that can actually help HR so
Make a
nobody has
difference.
to go through what I went through? And I went with, I'm going to start something that helps HR and help people so people don't have to ever go through what I went through and what those women went through on that boat and whatnot. We need this education to instill culture. We need this education to instill change. We need this education to instill the opportunity to be able to get to that bottom line that is ever so important to, advisors, Wall Street, and the CEO. And if you do not instill that education, you will end up on that boat sailing by yourself, just like that CEO and GM, and there's nobody left in that organization.
Well, and I love the story behind all that because I think one of the things that, hopefully anybody who watches and listens to it after the fact can take from this is like, it is hard work. It's hard work and it can be really scary and there is lots of unknowns and you might get taken to the cleaners once in a while, but it's worth it in the long run. It's worth it in the long run. And I think sometimes that's where, our fear of, but what if it doesn't go well? Or like, what if I end up losing my job? Or what if, it doesn't go, I take one on the nose and it's like, you know what, that might happen. That might happen. And that's okay. But it's worth it in the end, I think is something that everybody in the people space can take and walk away from and go, so, what are you going to do with that? Because I think there's so many opportunities.
There's so many
opportunities.
Just go,
I don't want to.
Right. Well, I mean, there's also the fear, like, you know, what I mean, like I've been through the recessions and whatever the hell this is now, right? The number one job in demand right now, with like, what is there, 12 million jobs open, even though we're quote unquote in a recession, 12 million
Yeah.
jobs, low unemployment, but we're in a recession. The number one job that's open, HR, right?
Yep.
You don't have to settle. You can, just like your employees don't have to settle, you don't have to settle. You
Yeah.
find that right opportunity, you find that right organization. And if you're going to bet on anyone, bet on yourself, because like we take the most risk. We have the least amount of budget, but the most amount of employees. We have the same amount of employees as CEO, but the least amount of budget. And so you got to be able to build yourself. And you know, one of the things that we're doing at SkillCycle is to help you to realize this moment. And so, you know, Chris, as I mentioned, we are put together a 3-part certification series, which is culture revitalization, for all HR leaders out there, to go through this certification to help you with some of the things that we're talking about in this
Yeah.
conversation, but to also get coaching along with it. And again, it's on me. It's on SkillCycle because I created this for you, and it's by you. And we want to be able to give your employees the tools that you need, but HR's got to put the oxygen mask on also, and you got to take care of yourself, or you're not going to be able to take
Yeah.
care of the organization. And I forgot about that. I forgot about that at least half of my career. Everybody was above me. I didn't take care of myself, and it didn't yield any results. The minute I started taking care of myself, I started to yield results.
Well, and one of the things you brought up on this that I think is a really important piece that you tied into of the job market, and this ties to we're not gonna pivot into generative AI, I promise. But as we look at what's happening with technology, it's not surprising to me at all that a big area of opportunity where we still see a lot of opportunity is in HR and anything people related.
Mm-hmm.
Because as technology and automation and all these things continue to rise, what are the things that people go, you know what we need though, that we can't seem to find is people who truly have this tenacity and understand people and know how to manage and work with people and actually execute that. Because the reality is, no matter where organizations go, people are still going to be at the core of it. I mean,
Yeah.
they're still going to be at the core of it. No matter what we end up doing, no matter how advanced the algorithms get, there's still going to be people making decisions, doing work, doing all the stuff behind the scenes that ultimately, if you know how to differentiate yourself and show, I know how to lead this part of the organization, it is a solid investment to make, I think,
Yeah.
for anybody. But it goes back to needing to invest in your own skills. And I think
Yeah.
that, to your point, I've seen that time and time again. We tend to be so busy taking care of everybody else that we don't see. It's like if you don't work out, the muscles atrophy. It's
Yeah.
not like you get stay steady. It's like, no, if you're not investing in yourself, you're actually falling behind.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to become Terminator overnight with all this, you know, AI generator. And even if we do, we still need good troops in the ground, like, you know, to beat the machines and the robots. You need critical thinking skills for that. And you need to know how to communicate and collaborate. So skills are still always, you know, the bedrock of what we're going to do, whether, you know, the robots take over or not. But I mean, it goes back to what I said in the last episode. All this stuff, you know what I mean, with an AI, chat GPT, what have you, it's a mirror of us. And if
It is.
that mirror is not skilled, and if that mirror is cracks, the technology is going to show the crack. We need to look at this technology as enablement, that this technology can save a lot of time and dollars and resources, which is great. But those time, dollars, and resources are going to go right out the window if people do not have the skills, like, you know what I mean, to be able to do their job, because it's a mirror. And, you know, well, if, you know, they get smarter as who knows, like, you know what I mean? I always think about, like, you know, some of the stuff that I use, which I definitely use, you know, when it helps me shorten, like, you know, a paragraph of writing something. But I'm just like, I don't know, like, are they pulling this from Fox News or CNN? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what sources are they pulling this to? Like, you know, that I have this hybrid baby of, like, you know, speak. And I'm just like, and there isn't accuracy, right, within it. And
Yeah.
there's reasons why there's not accuracies within it. It's because, like, of our own inaccuracies that are out there all over, you know what I mean, the media and the web. And so, like, again, this is a skilling issue. And if
It's a
we don't
skilling
have the
issue. It
skills,
very
they
much
don't
is.
have the skills.
Nope. I think that's one of the things that why the skill conversation isn't going anywhere
Yeah.
is, you know, as I've looked at this, it's very much the ones and zeros of even technology. Like you said, even the advancements in technology, it's like, well, they're still built on people. So if people's ones and zeros are out of alignment, so is everything they build and everything that happens after that. And that's
Yeah.
where leaning into this kind of a thing is critical. And actually, the better you know how to navigate it, to the whole point of sustainability and getting the courage to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to take this risk and it may blow up in my face, but I'm confident in doing that because I know it's the right thing to do. And I have the skills to do something different if the organization is either not ready or unwilling to do the hard work it needs to do.
Well, just look at the last 20 years. The number one, I don't know if anybody recognizes this, the number one complaint from CEOs is hiring and talent, right? But
Yep.
yeah, they're cheap and they don't put any money in hiring and talent. But they've been saying it for 20 years. Number one reason why CEOs get fired, lack of change management, right? And people look at change management as being fluffy. Change management is not fluffy. It's
Well,
everything
it's
that happens
not.
with the organization every single day. From every pivot, restructure, new hire, change of manager, divestiture, acquisition, sunsetting of a product. Like every organization is a change machine. And if you're not able to instill all the dynamics of what change is and the core components of what change is communication, collaboration, situational leadership, emotional intelligence, and those along with project management and executive sponsorship, but those things are not instilled, you're failing. And so when you do not educate your people, you're basically, laminating the failure sign for yourself. But of course, you're not going to take that. You're going to cascade it down to the organization and make them pay. And those create toxic culture. And guess what?
Yep.
Going back to the millennial conversation where pre-COVID, everybody was like, saying it's the millennial issue. This is not a millennial issue. This has always been a
No.
learning issue. This is what all the negative headlines are. So just like, let's just start going with the negative headlines, skills shortage, war on talent, great resignation. Why don't we come out with the headlines just like, we've solved the talent gap, right? And
Yeah.
this is how we did it. I mean, that's essentially the headline that we're trying to create at SkillCycle is that like, that used to infuriate me as a former buyer is that all this crap that I would buy, it exasperated
Didn't
the
do
problem
anything.
because
Yeah.
it didn't follow the natural workflows within organizations that are constantly changing and evolving, right? It was trying to put HR and people in a box. You can't put HR and people in the box. We're constantly changing people and we need to make it very evergreen and everflow. And so like that was like, like the core thing of like my anger. I'm just like, I actually need to create something that's beneficial for people and for learners and that actually work that could actually solve this problem. So we're not talking about it 20 years from now. So that's my thing. And inching along
Yeah.
the way.
Well, and so as we're coming into the home stretch on this, I'm actually really curious where, because when I've had conversations like this, and even some of the feedback I got from our last one was that it's one of those resounding rally cries, right? Where people go, yeah, like we're behind it. We should do this. And then a lot of people get stuck because they're like, I don't know where to start type of a thing. So for folks, because again, I just recently read through a really in-depth research report on this that was talking about where most organizations are in this. And despite what you see on the LinkedIn news feed where people act as though like we've got this cracked, like it's all done. It's like, no, actually most people haven't even chipped the tip of the ice off the tip of the iceberg type of a thing. Where are you finding people having success getting started with it? Because even going back to everything we've talked about in this is a journey. This isn't like just do this and magically you've solved the talent gap in your organization. So where are people starting and having success with that?
For like a bunch of our clients, I want to say that they're falling into three pillars. The
Okay.
one is the progressive HR. And what they were is that they were HR in lots of enterprise organizations like me, similar to me, that are now going into, startup organizations that are well backed and well funded and where they actually get to build. Right. And
Okay.
so they are getting like, okay, if you want to go from an organization of 20 to 100 and you don't want to spend all the money essentially that you just raised, like, this is the path or a plan that could save you money, still get you those 100 people. And so that they'll actually stay. So they're being very progressive and money oriented and they're being builder. And we see a lot of these, especially within mid-market, not all tech companies, like we're seeing it within healthcare, we're seeing it within education, et cetera. So the progressive ones, you know what I mean, who have where they've made it work once, because that's what I had for me. I made it work once, and I'm going to take this playbook, and especially if you have the ability to build up and you have a supportive CEO and board, that's good. Pillar two is where I see, especially within enterprise, they've been there for a while. They're at the point where it's all junk, it's all stupid. You know what I mean? I am going to make things happen. Again, they tie everything is tied back. Every single one of these pillars, they tie it back to money. I'm going to make things happen. I'm going to get the buy-in. I'm going to start inch by inch. I'm going to focus on champions with an XYZ department and get that buy-in, and then be able to continue to push this out. It's a slower route to go, but they're similar to the progressives. They've been dealing with the bureaucracy of the centralization, decentralization of enterprise and all the muck in between. And especially now where organizations want to save money, HR can really come out as a hero for how they're saving money by whacking systems that they don't use, by creating efficient and effective processes,
tightening up their ecosystems.
Right, by tying goals to learning, by helping with the alleviation of churn and showing that dollar. So that's another one. The third pillar I want to say, I want to call them the Avengers. They much like me, got beat down, over 20 years. And I think what they're realizing is similar to what I realized, is that I don't have to do this. But if I do this and you work with me, this is where I can help you. And I think that they're coming at it from a different angle where they're very experienced. They have the baseline credentials, not just within HR, but they have baseline credentials within strategy and with execution. And for lack of a better word, they don't put up bullshit. And they shouldn't have to, right? Because if you're like me, when I walked into that toxic organization, I saw a world of opportunity. Even everybody was just like, yo, that is a suicide. Like, no, bar's low. I can go on and build within. They're doing it, and they're doing it in a very pragmatic way where, again, they're making those small steps to show the bigger ROI, but they're doing it with the stance. Like, if you don't want me, fine. I can go, to other pastures. And so, those Avengers are really realizing their dollars and their value and taking their skills to organizations and basically coming in like, no, I'm not building my seat at the table. I have a damn seat at the table. And, this is essentially what we're going to do. So, and those HR individuals, I love them. I mean, it's because, they're seasoned, they have the expertise. The ones I worry about are the ones that don't have the expertise and that have been pushed up that ladder where they're a recruiter and now they're a CHRO at a big tech company. Those are the HR people that make us look really bad because these are the ones that allowed mass Zoom firings, back in COVID and still now. These are the ones where organizations are not acting humanely. Those are the ones that are getting bulldozed, by some of the bad CEOs out there and being used as an example. I think that at the end of the day, whatever pillar you're in or whatever capacity or competencies you're in, the thing that I always looked at, these are my morals and values. And will a company complement them, or is a company going to be the opposite of them? And I always see opportunity to complement, but when it does become workable, you got to go. And right now, your number one job in demand, and you will be. You will continue to be. So this is not getting solved overnight. So know your dollar, know your worth, and go get it. That's my recommendation.
Yeah, well, and I think that's helpful for folks who may, kind of listen to this and because I think there's a lot of folks who are kind of weighing where they're at right now. And I know that the markets are saying, oh, because of this, people are just going to hunker down and stick where they are. And I actually, to your point, I think that's terrible advice to go, well, the markets are down, so I just need to put up with whatever I'm in. And I like that you laid out different options that different people can take because, again, I see it in terms of even my trajectory on this, where how I've kind of grown into different things where, yeah, if you're in one of those big companies and you still are at that point where you're like, I think, Lindsay, you made a comment about what if you haven't taken the chance to try yet? And I think there is some opportunities, even in those big orgs where I've been in big orgs where people are like, you can't change things here. And it's like, well, give it your best college try on that and take the advice that you've highlighted along the way here, which is find those areas where you can make an impact.
Right.
and try and build that case. Because I've been surprised over the years in organizations where people said, this will never change.
Yeah.
You can drive change type of thing, but you got to know when you get to a point where you go, yeah, this isn't happening.
It's picking and choosing. But here's some solid dollars and facts. I've hired 15 people since the new year. It wasn't hard to hire these 15 people. They all had jobs. Know why they were leaving? Lack of development, lack of remote work. They don't give a shit. This mentality that me and you had, we've been through recessions before, right? Where there were no jobs. There are still jobs. So I don't care what this is called. When there's still that many jobs, people have opportunity, and this is still an employee market, whether you realize it or not. You can continue to force people. It was the easiest hiring I have done. So all those companies out there that lost their good employees that now work for me, I just want to say thank you, because it cost me nothing and it cost you something.
Yeah. Cost you a lot that you may not even realize that you've lost yet. That's the
yeah. Number one reason, right? Like I literally I interviewed 11 people, all from the same Fortune, 500 organization. I'm like, wow, I'm interviewing a lot of people from this organization. Like what's the deal? We can't work remote anymore. I go, I'm like, so you're leaving? No, I already quit. I don't care. I'm gonna spend my efforts, interviewing full time. I was like, well, you least should try to stay in this work part time and do this quiet quitting. She goes, no, because that meant I had to go into the office, right? I'm like, all right, so let's talk about you. So people don't understand this, organizations like myself, we're building, we have our struggles. We are by no means perfect, and I am not the best CEO in the world. But what I do understand is money, dollars and cents with a C and cents with an S, and opportunity. And that's the way that we're continuing to strive. And when you bring in good people that are especially that frustrated, you can reap a lot of opportunity that you could have had if you had a culture of learning that was open and engaging, and that was evolving, with pain. So again, thank you. Cost me nothing.
Yeah.
They all left.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is I can think of, every once in a while you'll bump into somebody that's like, yeah, but I just don't know. I don't know if it works. And I cannot think of a single example of an organization I've seen where they actually have done this the right way, where they've actually done this the right way, where they haven't had their expectations literally blown out of the water. It's not even just like, hey, we ended up accomplishing what we thought we were going to accomplish. That has never been my experience. Again, does it always go perfect like that? No, it doesn't. And sometimes there's trade-offs and things like that.
Because it's point in time. So they see the success, and then it doesn't become a focus anymore, and it drops. And then it only becomes a big thing to do again when you're in pain. We need pain comes back unless you make things evergreen when it comes to performance and all that. I had the same things. I had a masterpiece of some work that I did at Pearson, and then I got completely sucked wind, the next year, because we didn't continue with the plans that we had when it came to educating the employees and instilling the learning. We dropped it for another priority. And guess what happens when I dropped that and I didn't instill it long term? Guess what? The whole thing, came out. And next thing you know, we're back to rehiring and recycling, right? So that's the thing. It has to be part of the company goals and organizations. We have to stop looking at point in time. Point in time equals pain. It has to be evergreen, just like our goals and everything else that we're doing.
Yeah. Well, and I think on kind of a concluding note, I think that's why your comment earlier about CHROs making great CEOs is they understand that dynamic nature of people and how this all fits together and the complexity of all this, and see how to play 10 yards ahead instead of, hey, we got to just hit this quarter. We just got to take all our attention on this and cross this finish line. It's like, no, actually we shouldn't, because the second we do that, we're taking all our attention off of this thing that's going to get us all the way down the field.
Yeah. It's your people plan. It's your people strategy. and
Yep.
needs to be built that way. And I know we're up on time. So again, once again, for HR individuals that want to come in for an HR certification on culture revitalization, 3-part course that includes our coaching, come in the SkillCycle, say culture revitalization, and we'll get you up and running on that. It's my gift to you for all the pain that you're going through, but I'm hoping to alleviate some of the pain with ongoing
I
learning.
love it. I love it, Kristy. Well, that's 2 episodes in a row where both times you've had something to offer to the community, again, to say, hey, here's something we can do for you. Because going back to it, if you're not taking care of yourself in this area, you're not
Yeah.
going to be healthy to the rest of the organization. So thank you so much. I always enjoy our conversations. We can keep this one like rated PG this time. So
Yeah,
I think
no,
we're good.
I think we're
Yeah, it was
good.
good.
Thank you. And thank you, Chris, for everything that you do. You have
Yeah.
been a true inspiration, I think, for me, because I'm always HR for a lot of HR people out there. So keep on doing what you're doing. This is education, everything you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks everybody for listening and watching whenever it is you listen and watch. And we will be back next week. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. And I'm going to be future focused. Have a great weekend as well. Talk to you later.
Bye.